Frank Fat is the original founder of this restaurant. He started it in 1939. That happened to be the year I was born to Frank and Mary Fat. So I'm his son. Yeah. So he had 6 children. I'm just in the middle somewhere. The original Frank Fat's first son, who took over managing this restaurant after Frank retired, was born in China. And my dad actually had come from China, sent over here when he was 15 years old. He didn't know English, he didn't have any money, and he just had a couple contacts. But he came because his grandfather said, you know, you need to go to America, because America at that time was Gold Mountain. There's a Chinese term that they always referred to America in China, and it was called Gim San, Gum San. Gum is gold, San is mountain. That's all because of the gold rush in 1849. Everybody in the world knew about gold being discovered in Coloma, California, right? Which is right up the hill. So, of course, this was years later. He immigrated here in 1919. And so he was 15, 16 years old. And to earn money, his job was to find a job, earn money, send the money home, and eventually go back home. So anyway, he came over here and he landed in Angel Island. That's where they detained all the immigrants from Asia. And he stayed there for several months because he couldn't get clearance to be allowed in the United States. After he got clearance, then he moved into San Francisco and went to Dayton, Ohio, Youngstown, Ohio, all these cities back east, because they were told that there were business or jobs back there. And so after he did that stint, he started picking up English, learning a little bit of the trade. I mean, he did everything from not only dishwashing, but clean up and all the menial labor, because he wasn't skilled at anything. He only had a 5th grade education back in China, and it did not include English, you know. So he came over here and he had to fend his way. And at that time, it was still a lot of prejudice back then. You know, the Chinese Exclusion Act was still in effect, and so there was a lot of bias against the Chinese, and he had to overcome all that and stick it out, learn his skills, learn his English, and earn money. When my dad eventually ended up to Sacramento, he worked at menial jobs. One incident was he ended up heard a cousin that owned Hong King Lum Restaurant, which was on 3rd and I Street, right across from the SP Depot. He ended up asking for a job, and the cousin said, yeah, you can work as a dishwasher, and he did that. And by the way, I know you need a place to live. We don't have any facilities, but you can sleep in the basement. You know what, if you ever walk on sidewalks, sometimes you see these grates there, and those are lifts, and there's a basement down there where they deliver things. Well, that's where my dad had to sleep for a long time. And so he did that for a little while, and then he was working and saving, worked himself up to being a waiter at Hong King Lum, and eventually managed that restaurant for several years. While he was doing that, he was, well, not perfecting, he still had an accent all the way to his death, but he learned enough English and saved enough money to buy this site here at Frank Fat's. At that time, this wasn't worth much, but he had a dream to build his restaurant. So that's what he did. He got a loan from a customer, and the customer, when he was managing at Hong King Lum, one customer became a friend of his because my dad used to sometimes go up to Reno and place Keno tickets, you know. If you hit it just right, you win a lot of money, right? If you hit the numbers. So this customer gave my dad some money and says, here, put this on some of these numbers and we'll hope we're lucky. Well, he hit several $1,000s. Back in those days, was it 1938 or something like that? That was a lot of money. So he came back with the money, and the customer had moved on and didn't expect to win anything, and my dad didn't know where to give the money, so he held on to it for probably a year or longer. And when the customer came back and saw my dad said, "Hey, your ticket won." Gave him all the money. And so actually that customer was so appreciative. He was the one that funded my dad money to purchase this site here at 806 L Street. Over the years, like, he took care of Earl Warren. Earl Warren was actually, I think he was.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was originally, before he became governor of the governor of California. I think he was a district attorney, and then he was perhaps a legislator or something like this. Anyway, he came here regularly, and my dad always took care of him, and he became governor, of course. And then after he became governor, he was appointed to the Supreme Court of the United States. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but so when he left Sacramento, on his last night, he said to Frank, my dad, he said, "Frank, I want to let you know I'm leaving for Washington, D.C., so I'm not going to see you for a long time." And so my dad shook his hand and said, and furthermore, he says, "If you are ever in Washington, D.C., look me up." Of course, my dad, what reason would I go to Washington, D.C.? I've got to run my restaurant, right? So he did that for several years. But then an occasion came up where they wanted him, his group wanted him to go to Washington, D.C. to apply for a charter for a savings and loan bank that they were going to start up in Sacramento. And so he went to Washington, and so on one of his free nights, my dad called up and said, "Well, I think I'm going to call up my old friend, Earl Warren." So he picks up the phone and calls the Supreme Court, right? He says, "Hi, Earl, this is Frank Fatt. Remember me?" All out of the blue. And so Earl said, "Frank, good to hear from you. Where are you?" "Well, I'm at this hotel." "Stay right there. I'm going to send my driver over to pick you up." And so my dad was waiting there, and the driver picked him up, took him to the Supreme Court, and brought him to the chambers, Earl Warren's Chief Justice of the Supreme Court chamber, and said, "Frank, it's so great to see you. Let's have a drink for old time's sake." He reached down in the bottom of his, in his chamber, he had a desk, and he was in full robe and all that, pulled up a bottle of early times bourbon, poured each a drink, and they had a toast for each other. It is. And that was one of the highlights my dad told me. Of course, I wasn't there, but that was a kind of exemplifies a lot of the wonderful experiences that my dad had with important people, regular people, Sacramentans, but mostly involved in the community or the national politics. I think it's an honor. It's an honor, first of all, to be the son of my dad, because he was hardworking individual, because when we were growing up, we never saw him. Well, right now we would take our kids to the ball games and practice and go to the school events. Well, I never had that experience with my dad. Why? Because he was here all the time, taking care of business. So that I learned, I admired that a lot. And hard work, I think the things that I learned from being around him, but not a lot, is he is very honest. I saw it here. He had a lot of humility. I saw it here. And he was just an honorable man. And that I got from him. So what is this for, right? This is 80 years now. And I think it's in honor of what he exemplified, you know. And he's been able to, you know, I'm not in the restaurant business. There's a whole bunch of stories, but I want to get a shout out to the rest of my family first, right? Wings passed, and Tom's passed and all that, but we have
These are a lot of family members.
we have sons and daughters that still are running the business. My brother Jerry, the youngest baby of the family, he's president of our corporation. My son Kevin, he is chief operating officer. And what we're trying to do is instill those qualities that we were taught through all our restaurants. Take care of your customers, make sure the food is good, make sure the service is good, give them good, honest deal, and make them happy. And that's what we've learned, and we continue on. Fortunately, I married a wonderful woman. She's very skilled, Lena Fat. She was a pharmacist. That's how I met her in dental school at UCSF. Well, she didn't like practicing pharmacy, so she went on to CIA. And CIA is not, Central Intelligence Agency. It's the Culinary Institute of America, and at Hyde Park. And she also took cooking classes in Hong Kong, and she studied cooking, and she became a chef. So she is the one that has helped maintain the quality and the creativity of all our other restaurants. And it's a constant effort by the whole family. And it'd go on. We have about 40, 50 names to mention, but everyone's contributing, working in some way to continue the legacy, and hope we can go for another 80 years.